Well, last week, Reverend Andy made a convincing case pre-Thanksgiving for giving thanks even when we don't feel like there's much to be thankful for. But now the holiday is over, the leftovers are dwindling, and hey, at least we don't need to worry about being thankful for another whole year, right? Well, maybe not. In the last 20 years or so, there has been so much written about the positive effects of gratitude on health, happiness, and well-being that the word has become ubiquitous. I can hardly read through my junk email without seeing the word gratitude. The advertisers are so grateful for my business. The yoga studios sign all of their newsletters in gratitude, and I'm sure to be invited to some seminar or mindfulness retreat invoking the power of being grateful. I have to admit, the word gratitude has become quite cloying to me. I also have to admit that I'm not naturally the most grateful person. Just ask my husband, who often cleans the house, only to have me come home and say, "You moved all my stuff, I can't find anything." "You're welcome," he's gone to Riley, saying in response. So naturally, being annoyed by the word gratitude and not having a natural proclivity toward feeling thankful makes me the perfect person to give a sermon on gratitude. Well, maybe if gratitude is something that can be learned. I always believed that one should feel truly thankful before thanking someone so as to avoid that greatest of all trespasses, insincerity. But the attitude of gratitude, it turns out, is not so much an emotion as a habit, which is good news, because in noticing the things I dislike more than the things I should be thankful for, I'm not alone. The negativity bias of the human brain is a well-described phenomenon about which academic psychologist Tom Gilovich says, "It's so easy for people to feel that life has made things harder for them than it has for other people. And we think that if some good fortune befell us, we'd be grateful, we'd be happy forever. We wouldn't sweat the small stuff anymore." And that's true for a while, but then we adapt to it. All of a sudden, we're sweating the small stuff again. We just seem to focus more on the things that go wrong for us than all the minute little things around us that are right. Gilovich and a colleague published a paper using a headwind-tailwind analogy and found in their research that, for example, people with siblings are overwhelmingly likely to believe that their sibling had it easier than they did. And sports fans are always thinking that more of the refs' calls go against their team, and their team has the more difficult schedule. They also found that when people perceive the deck to be stacked against them, they're more likely to cut corners at work or to see ethically questionable behavior as justified. Our perception of all the headwinds or hardships we face may explain the populist trend in politics. If you feel your country is in worse shape than it really is, you may feel that you need a leader who will really shake things up. And Gilovich tells how it also explains why privileged groups object to being called privileged, saying, if you tell people how lucky they are, they don't like that. They're like, "You're diminishing my achievement." But if you ask people, how has luck played a role in your life, people can get in touch with their tailwinds or how lucky they are. So, all of us ingrates can become more grateful with practice, but is that worthwhile? Is this whole thing just the latest self-help fad, or is the benefit real? Lots of articles about gratitude practice vaguely refer to what the research shows without anything to back up these claims. But if you look at the studies from the literature which actually have citations, there really is good data supporting improved sleep, decreased blood pressure, more marital happiness and pro-social behavior, even a tendency to exercise 40 minutes more a week in those with a regular gratitude practice than in control groups. And a couple of decades of happiness research shows that anywhere from a 10 to a 25% improvement in happiness can be attributed to gratitude practice. So being a big fan of evidence, I decided to put aside my annoyance of the word itself, and about 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to try out some of the tools or techniques that make up the practice of gratitude. The first is a practice of interior gratitude, noticing and being inwardly appreciative of everyday things. A.J. Jacobs, that author who thanked 1,000 people who contribute to his morning cup of coffee, calls this finding the hidden masterpieces all around you. He was able to find great joy in those little cardboard sleeves that keep you from getting burned by a hot cup of coffee, which are apparently called zarfs. The poet Gerard Manley Hopkins, in his poem Pied Beauty, gives praise for finch's wings and the rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, among other things typically taken for granted. Brother David Steindl-Rast, a monk closely associated with his talks on gratitude, noted that upon returning from an African village where clean water was in short supply, that he would turn on the faucet and just have this immense appreciation whenever the water came. But this only lasted for a brief time before he was taking it for granted again. So he put stickers on the water faucet to remind him of the wonder of having clean water available at the turn of a tap. For those of us who find the language of gratitude a bit saccharine at times, the author of the Headwinds, Tailwinds article advises, ask yourself a slightly different question. Not, what do I have to be grateful for? But what are the ways in which I'm boosted along? The invisible things that make my life easier. So as an example, instead of being frustrated that the elevator's taking so long to come, you could think about how there's this magic box that can transport you from one floor to another quickly when you have heavy loads to carry. Next is the practice of exterior gratitude, that which is expressed. This involves thanking people directly, either in person or in writing. A few years ago, I was talking to a VUU member about the death of a teacher who had meant a lot to him, and how he regretted that he had not gotten a chance to thank her before her death. It made me think of a woman I knew for many years growing up. My mom hired her to teach me French, and for $5 a lesson, I would go to her house for several years, and this often turned into her telling me things about her life or asking me about mine. The lessons continued into my teen years when, frankly, French was not a priority, and she was often busy, so we'd often miss weeks at a time. And the long and short of it is that today I would be hard-pressed to hold a conversation in French. But knowing this woman from Argentina who could speak 6 languages and had parties full of international people in the middle of my homogenous Nebraska upbringing had a tremendous influence on my appreciation of other cultures. And her unfailing praise of me, second I think only to my grandparents in my childhood, gave me self-confidence that has continued to benefit me my entire life. And so 20 years after the last time I saw her, I tracked down her address, and I wrote her a letter detailing the positive influence that she had been on my life, and I thanked her for it. I didn't know the state of her health and what, if any, reply I would get. But a few weeks later, a letter received in the shaky handwriting of a now elderly woman. And in the years since, we've continued to exchange cards at the holidays at least once a year and still keep in touch. As A.J. Jacobs found when thanking the 1,000 people for his cup of coffee, a lot of times we are reluctant to thank people because we think it's going to be awkward. But the vast majority were really touched. I think we overestimate how disingenuous gratitude appears to be. People are so starved for gratitude, he writes. I know in my personal experience, when I've been thanked by someone for doing volunteer work and what I could see was a transparent attempt to get me to do more volunteer work, it still feels nice to be thanked. And then there's that most widespread tool of gratitude practice, the gratitude journal. This is the practice of writing down 1 to 5 things per day, typically at the end of the day, that you're grateful for. It's the method used in most of the cited studies on gratitude, and it's also been the target of some of the backlash against gratitude practice. In an article about her depression, Liz Brown noted that after getting advice from numerous friends to keep a gratitude journal, she did such lists for months, but only felt worse. She writes, "Gratitude lists didn't help me one bit. Writing them was a practice that drove me deeper into shame and self-loathing when I was already in a dark place." She got more out of writing an ingratitude list on the advice of a therapist, which she said gave her the permission to feel bad. Other authors and bloggers have similarly criticized what they see as an attempt to suppress negative feelings and emotions. But while these voices detailing alternate personal experiences are valid, it seems to me that these criticisms miss the point of the gratitude practice. Writing lists of things to be grateful for is not meant to be an attempt to gloss over or deny negative emotions, but rather to counteract the brain's natural focus on the negative and shift the focus to the positive. It is not a panacea for bad feelings, and is certainly not a standalone treatment for clinical depression, but rather a tool for savoring and remembering moments of bliss. My own practice of gratitude journaling has been inconsistent at best, with a lot of stops and starts over the past few years. And I have not found, as is sometimes promised, that it is life-transforming, or that at the end of the day I have so many things to feel grateful for that I can hardly limit myself to 3 to 5. What I have found, that I never see discussed in any of the literature on this, is that reviewing the lists years after they were written serves as a sort of time capsule, a diary that captures what was going on in my life at the time and reminds me of things I might otherwise have forgotten. I've also found that it's best to write about things that are specific and often just the inconsequential things that happen during your day, rather than the things that are more generally what you're grateful for. I mean, there's only so many times I could write my husband, my kids, and my health on the list before I banned them from my lists altogether. There are also numerous variations on the gratitude journal that may appeal more. Putting little strips of paper with things that you're grateful for in a jar whenever they happen, and then reviewing it on New Year's Eve was one suggestion. And a great practice for parents to do with kids is to share 3 nice things that happened that day together when they tuck them in bed at night. And so after 5 or 6 years of suspending my eye rolls at the word gratitude and trying these practices, what can a self-proclaimed gratitude curmudgeon like me report? Well, I still have negative thoughts, and I still pay a lot of attention to minor irritations. But I have to say that now there's this little devil's advocate voice that reminds me of the things to be thankful for, even the opportunity for growth provided by the irritations. And my negativity just doesn't last as long. And I think it's just been in the past day or two that I've really been listening to that voice. Because, doing a sermon on a topic kind of keeps you honest. And so just yesterday, I was cleaning up after my dog had an accident in the house, and this is usually something that's going to put me in kind of a grumbling mood. But I thought, isn't it wonderful that my nearly 16-year-old dog is still alive for me to clean up after? And I do think rewiring the brain to notice more of the good things takes time and is cumulative over the years. But there are some shifts that can happen quite quickly as well. I remember that I joined the Board of Trustees here at VUU shortly after I first started hearing a lot about the research on gratitude and happiness. And one of the first things I had to do was attend this half-day board staff retreat on a Saturday. And I remember thinking while driving there that I don't have time for this. And I was thinking about all the things I had to do and the fact that my husband was now having to try and get both of our kids to all their activities, and it was a hardship on both of us. And I was just feeling lousy about having to go to this retreat. And then Reverend Andy had us open the session by sharing with each other how we were feeling to be there. And I heard myself say, "I'm feeling so grateful to be here today." And I wondered where that had come from. But then it sort of came true, because we had this wonderful session done by this great facilitator, and it really wasn't just contemplating our navels, and I ended up being really pretty thankful that I had gone that day. So in the end, I think that while the word gratitude is in danger of becoming watered down by overuse, that's no excuse to ignore the genuine wisdom that if you act as if you're grateful, you become grateful for real.